Hello and welcome to the podcast, The Neurodivergent Advantage. This is a fresh new podcast for 2026, and today, as I record, it is actually the very start of January. There's a reason that I wanted to record this, which I will go to in just a second, but even just sharing with you the process that I go through, because if you follow me at all, my name's Leslie Buckman and I am a trainer, a coach, and I work more in the leadership and communication space. But I also work with people on aspects like owning themselves, self-confidence, neurodivergence, neurodiversity. And this is so close to my heart because, let me put this down because I'm going to talk about this in a moment. It is close to my heart because I am neurodivergent myself. I am ADHD, which means autism and ADHD, and that's combined type. I have 3 kids and 2 of them are neurodivergent as well. My goal with everything that I do, whether it be my interaction with individuals day to day, through to what I do in my business, but also with information shared on here, it is to create more understanding, more of a shared conversation. And this brings me back to the why. One of my biggest frustrations in life is how cruel people can be to each other. And it doesn't just stop in the schoolyard. It continues into society, into the home, into the workplace. It is rife. And that comes from difference, lack of understanding, lack of empathy, and this unsettlement, this fear that sometimes sits underneath from fear of difference. And I'll go into this more because the whole topic of what we're going to go through in this podcast is the perceived normal, where it comes from, why there is a perceived wrong and right. And you notice I very specifically use the word perceive. Now, you and I also both know you cannot get people to start being nice to each other just by saying be kind or sticking posters on the wall. It just doesn't happen. People don't start to look outside of themselves until they are good within themselves. So with that in mind, what I aim to do is create more understanding, acceptance within the individual, if you are neurodivergent, but also externally for our workplaces, from society. So the reason why I was even holding this earlier is I see a lot of content generated on AI, and look, sometimes I use it for prompting. If my brain is just on stop and nothing's coming through, I'll use it for prompting on, what can I write about? What can I talk about based on what I do? So that is one way I use it. But in this podcast, I'm actually not going to be using any of that. I'm actually going back to basics, old school. And I literally write down all of my ideas on a notepad, topics that I want to speak about, things that I see as challenges. I look at the most common questions that come up, most common frustrations, and it's formed from that. And then I do old-fashioned research myself on each topic. So this is why, I've just got my written notepad, because I'm going back to basics, because sometimes that's one of the biggest learnings. Sometimes I feel we have drifted so far away from ourselves in whether it be masking, whether it be overstimulation, too much information coming through, and losing who we really are within ourselves, losing trust and faith and belief in our own voice, in our knowledge, but also our own capability to research further of that we don't understand. So some of the things that I'm going to go through in the podcast is masking and ableism, being careful of what you absorb, living in a created world, psychological safety and how it creates trust, time distortion and time blindness, why neurodivergents don't respond well to authority, toxic positivity, meltdowns versus shutdowns, the ADHD conundrum, belonging versus fitting in. And look, this is just for starters because there is so much that we can talk about. So look, today, what I want to go through with you is when we talk about being neurodivergent and shifting beliefs and perception, the sad thing is, and I encourage you to go research this yourself, because that is the whole point of this, is to evoke the beginnings of people just starting to question things that they hear, not just accepting the first point or statement and just running with it. So think about this. Stigma and discrimination is actually on the increase towards neurodivergent individuals. And by that, I mean, when we talk about neurodiversity versus neurodivergence, neurodiversity is all of us, all brains. Neurodivergence is those with a label attached. It is those who are described as autistic or ADHD, OCD, dyslexic, dysgraphia, all of that and more. So when we think about the sheer volume of information out there and the fact that stigma is still increasing, access to information isn't the problem. Like, we've got that in abundance. It's what we do with it. So think about this. Now, being neurodivergent is not easy. And if you're listening to this, what you may have found is not quite belonging or fitting in different environments, whether it be at school in the classroom, whether it be even in your own home. And if you're older now and working through and even in a workplace, you may still experience it. Now, what we have with shifting understanding and perception and how we treat those with a difference, one thing that I noted down here is it's the term of normal. Now, we have got centuries of imposed beliefs, perceptions, cultures, leadership, and this comes through as to what is normal. So it is almost described as the majority is and what we think someone should act like, talk like, communicate like, be like. Normal is the apparent majority. But my question within that is, even if there is a majority, who's to say what is right or wrong? Now, this hasn't come from any one person. It is a collective. So think about every single different part of the world, every single different culture. There is different normals. Would you say that is correct? So think of the different normals and why that is then even used that. As in, why does the normal or the majority have to be right or the way someone should be? So for a moment, if we were to think about now, what we're hearing is a rise of more understanding, a rise of conversation, as in, people really starting to question their own brain type and how they act and starting to discover things, because a lot more people are now sharing their own life experiences, things that they come up with, things that how they process things, how they see things, or even how they've really had to force who they are to mask, to try and behave like other people to be accepted. That in itself, masking, we're going to go through that on another episode. But there is this general awareness of what someone should be like. So if someone's trying to force themselves into that, what we then have is multiple systems and environments that don't shift or improve. Now, if you're also watching this and you've got the thought of, well, it's just a trend, this increase of neurodivergence, the different brain types, it's a trend, it's a buzzword. What I ask is you think about this. Is it perhaps more possible, if there's 8.4 billion people on the planet, that there is going to be different brain types as opposed to everyone just being the same? What is more likely? We're all built exactly the same, or that there is difference? Now, my next point, and because, look, my brain was flowing when I was working through this. Now, normal is a fluid, collectively shaped concept that has been formed over centuries. This is why we struggle so much with systems. It is inbuilt. It's come through from institutions, leaders, families, community, and it is inbuilt in everything we do and everywhere we learn, in education systems, and how things are done. So the shift is not going to happen immediately. But what this also means is, because it is a construct of thought that comes from different people sharing different ways, different considerations, it also means that we can shift it and improve. But it takes time, and it takes consistency and commitment and an openness to being transparent and an openness to be vulnerable. And that takes courage, because not everyone is nice about it, which you and I both know. Sometimes it's that view of, you put your head on a stick and you're going to get targeted. So it does take a lot to be able to really own who you are and speak up and voice thoughts and views on this and work to change. But it is worth it. And we'll also go through why as well. But I would hope as well, I'd be curious to know, even for you, what does it mean to you? Why is it worth it? Now, let's have a think about this. So if in effect, we can actually influence perception and understanding, does there even have to be a widely viewed normal? Yes, there's a majority. I mean, statistically, in anything you look at, there's a majority in everything. But why normal and not normal? Because again, that denotes and goes back through to right and wrong, should, shouldn't, so that it brings in line all of that type of language. Now, I think that we don't have to pigeonhole our normal. There's nothing wrong with difference. Now, where has this come from? Let's, think about this. This acceptance and the concern of what is different, this is where I've been leading through to. We know that even when we think about human behavior, we talk about freeze, flight, fight. But where does that come from? Remember, this is the herd mentality from eons ago. As people, we had it built in that we needed to be, for group survival, some level of conformity. So if there is someone that is different, that takes away from conformity and creates the unknown, risks survival. It infiltrates and shifts on how people feel, as in if they are out of the group, out of the herd. And that has stayed with us. But the thing is, we don't need that anymore, because yes, we are social beings and we need connection. We absolutely need that. But it's not in the way that it used to be in those days. So a couple of points that I've noted down is, yes, the historical conformity necessary for group survival, and anything outside of that is a threat. That's one thing. The next is identity. Now, my thoughts are, as I say, my thoughts, and I encourage you to really have your own thoughts and view on this, is the need to be part of a group can give some people significance or self-worth. Because what we see in this day and age is a lot of this need for validation from people to be accepted by others. There seems to be a lot of ruling that, and let's think about this, even if you go back to school days, you needed to be accepted in a group to feel valid. You had a lot of peer-based influences. Then as you go through into working life, it's the same. If you're not part of the group, your life is harder. It's made to be harder. And again, that depends on how other people treat you and their expectations and their behavior. So there's a lot of different dynamics within this whole scenario. This is why, even working through as we go through the podcast and different episodes, one aspect that I'll really be encouraging is that level of acceptance from yourself, your own self-validation, and for others. That is when we create the psychological safety where we can start to appreciate, respect, and welcome difference, because that is how we grow. Now, my next point that I noted is lack of understanding, because this in turn, lack of understanding becomes uncertainty, the unknown. It raises that part of the brain that starts to lean into fear. The what if this, what if that? And we are geared as people to have 80% negative thoughts versus 20% positive. So when we have unknowns, we sometimes create stories and meanings that are not real or factually based. And that is then what we use to go by and influencing how we behave to others and or ourselves and work forward. So it's that lack of understanding, which is huge. Now, with all of that in mind, think about how this impacts neurodivergent, those with different behavior types, different sensory needs, different communication styles, different processing. How does that then influence neurodivergence and how we are, but also how others treat people of difference? And this is a massive conversation, because even as I say that sentence, you may be thinking, well, there's so many other different areas and where that applies. And you are absolutely right. The amount that we seem to, target as those with difference is heartbreaking. Hence why I said at the start, that is what I aim to shift and encourage conversation. Now, if any larger group of people have a greater risk and a possibility of social assumptions and beliefs being brought into the day-to-day operations, it influences how people act. So larger groups have more possibility and more risk for unknowns to be shared, to be discussed, to be talked about, and inflamed. Think about if one person feels really strongly about something and they have the ability to convey that in a way that then draws other people in with that level of conviction and ability to communicate it, to get other people on board to the way that they think. That can be used in a very positive way or a very negative way. So when we talk about workplaces or any environment where there is a larger group of people, think about how it impacts day-to-day operations, the whole environment, the whole culture, and behaviors. If you don't manage it carefully, so I'm talking to you if you're in a leadership position, even, as an individual, if this is not managed carefully, it can potentially go in very much the wrong direction. If it is managed really well, it can be so positive, because it's actually proven that workplaces are 30% more effective when they are really embodying neurodivergence, neurodiversity. because it allows everybody to work to the different strengths, treat each other with respect, become more effective, and it brings so many benefits. This is why we've got the neurodivergent advantage. Now, because of societal view, neurodivergence can sometimes be seen as defective because we're not seen as the norm. I ask you this, consider any misunderstandings, whether you are the neurodivergent person, you have a different way of communication, or if you are someone that knows you kind of butt heads or don't quite understand someone else, because there are multiple things to consider. So for example, a person can be seen as too direct, confrontational, aggressive, but that's if someone is being direct, which is a communication style with neurodivergence. Now, when you talk about neurotypical communication, if you don't soften it or add on the tone, the variety, it's seen as rude. So you've got two very different communication styles, and if you don't have the understanding in between, that's when you get issues. Even if one person understands it, but the other person doesn't, you're still going to get issues. So this is why it's so important for the whole understanding. It's even if you look at different ways of doing things. If you perhaps see someone even at school or in the team, one of your team members or a leader, they've been given an ultimate goal, an ultimate outcome, but they've gone at it a very different way. So for example, let me give the example of school. If someone's got a maths equation and they need to get to a certain point, they could get marked down if they don't work it out in the correct way that is the correct way to mark it, to get to that equation. But really, if they've got their own way of thinking and still get there, who says it's right or wrong? Same as in a company. If you've got a particular result that you want to achieve, being able to let go and see people's strengths and their own thought processes and have an amount of creative freedom to get to somewhere, even if it is not how you thought it should be done, but if they still got there, perhaps this is actually a massive benefit because it's allowing different thought processes, different ways of approaching things, which is how we can come up with more solutions. It is how you create a more open environment, as in being able to raise different perspectives without fear of reprisal, fear of being penalized. It is how people can feel comfortable in themselves to share something direct without being shamed, without being told they're being rude. When really, if you say that to someone that's neurodivergent when they've just said what they think, they would then be trying to figure out how it's come across as rude. Contexts are very different. It's even when you might perhaps go through a member of the team and you see that they're perhaps not just taking initiative. So again, the perception might be that they're not willing and they're not a team player. But if you haven't communicated specifically with specific instructions, they will do what they have been told to do. Some people, it's if you give them the things that they need to be doing, this is your role, they will complete it to the best of their ability. But if you haven't said, right, and what is classed as going over and above is these specific actions, some people will not know. And again, there's that communication breakdown of understanding. So this is why we will go through in so much more in the different styles of communication, in different tips, different aspects, different considerations for multiple different environments to create that shared understanding. So for now, what I want to leave you with is the takeaways from this episode. The biggest one is, why do we fear difference so much? And I've given a couple of examples. And can difference be an advantage? I believe it can. This is also how we can start having more open conversations and moving away from people feeling offended once something is shared that differs to their beliefs. You can then have some really great conversations and look at how we can move forward. So I just went off on a tangent. I'm very aware of that. So I do apologize. So summarizing, number one is difference. How do we start to appreciate difference? Why is normal classed as normal? It's not either right or wrong. And how do we start to embrace this? Because there is an advantage to neurodivergence. There is an advantage to neurodiversity. It's just starting somewhere and moving forward and creating shared understanding. So thank you so much for listening. I will see you in the next episode.